I am Phillippe Bouissou. I'm managing partner and founder of Blue Dots Partners, which is a management consulting firm helping companies grow faster. Catch me on this week's Jesse T Show.
Phillippe, welcome to the Jesse T Show, brother.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
Man, a pleasure is also mine. I really appreciate you sharing the time with us today, and I'm super excited to hear more about you. So if you could, just give us a little bit of context of who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm from Europe. I'm from France, but I have been living in Silicon Valley for 31 years. And I've always loved software and technology, and I always thought that this was the place to be on the planet. So I moved here back in early 1990, studied a Unix software company, and I've been living happily since then in this wonderful place.
Unbelievable life story that we're going to talk about. So what was it that was the catalyst? Was it after college? Was it, did you go to college? Like what was life like before you left to come to the States and land in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so I was, educated in France. I went to École Normale Supérieure, which is kind of the MIT equivalent of France, if you will. And I studied physics, and I did my PhD in physics and chaos theory. And I never really wanted to spend the rest of my life doing research in physics. And the reason is I'm a very people-oriented guy. I like people. I like to interact. I like to meet people and help. And in physics, what you do is you really live in a very deep groove. You're doing research on a very specific topics that maybe 12 or 20 people around the world really understand and spend their life on. But you don't really have a chance to meet people and discover new things. So I knew very early on that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing research in physics. And I wanted to do business. So after my PhD, once I finished my PhD, I came across an interesting technology in France. And I told the guy, I said, look, I want the exclusive rights to the technology and I want to start a business in Silicon Valley. And they gave it to me, and they kept a piece of the company. They gave it to me, and I studied a Unix software company based on this technology here. And then I sold it, fairly quickly after to our largest customer. But that's the way I ended up being in Silicon Valley.
What was the lifestyle change like? Because there's some people that come to Silicon Valley. I have some friends in that space and some connections out there. And, there's also Austin, Texas is becoming like a little bit of a kind of mecca of itself in terms of technology. But what was it like getting to Silicon Valley as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kid from across the pond? And what was that experience like ingraining yourself in that community?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was actually easy, and you have to understand my background. I'm actually a military brat. My dad, was in the military. We moved every other years. I lived on many, many different places and bases. I was actually born in Germany because he was stationed over there. So to me, moving to a new place where you don't know anyone, you don't know anything, it was very familiar. And it was just, to me, it was just another move. And yeah, the language was different, but that was really about the only difference. So I didn't have any problem adapting here. And there's so many foreigners here. There's people from all over the world. So it's very easy to make connections and meet people. And adapting to the valley really was easy for me.
We had a prior conversation to you jumping on the podcast, and you brought up your dad today, but you also brought him up during that conversation. He had a very unique responsibility. Could you share with the world a little bit about what your dad was known for, responsible for at one point of his military career?
Yeah, so my dad joined the army very early on. He went to the West Point equivalent in France. And then at some point, he was in charge of the nuclear for the French army. So he had the key, the president had the other key. So it was a big responsibility for him. And I always ask him, I said, how do you feel about this? He said, well, look, I'm a soldier. If the order is given to me, I execute the order. It's not my role to question that order. And he was carrying this little box. It was actually quite big. With him all the time, and he had to test it twice a day. So sometimes he would beep in the middle of the night. It would be at random time. And I remember, being on the beach on the southwest of France, and he had this box with him because, again, he had to carry it with him everywhere he went. And they were testing him, and we were in the middle of swimming. It's like, what are you doing with this box? And I felt awkward. But yeah, that was his job, and he did that for a few years. He actually ran also a nuclear base, and it was quite interesting. And yeah, it was interesting.
So just for some context for those that are listening and watching, there's all these Hollywood movies that talk about wartime or any kind of lunch, and you'll see where the president has one key and someone else who's trusted and empowered to have the other key. They have to put them in or put in codes, turn them at the same time. Was this pretty much his responsibility as well? Like if crap hit the fan and there needed to be some sort of launch, like he would be simultaneously the second person turning that key?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a physical key. It was actually a box with a keypad. So you have to enter a fairly complicated code, which he never wanted to give to me.
Sure.
I asked him several times. But yeah, you had to punch the code. You have to establish a communication. They would authentify you, make sure you're the right person. So there was a whole process involved, which I don't know the details because it was secretly guarded. But there was a whole process, yes. And only him could do it, and the president on the other hand. And once the two things matched, then you would trigger the attack.
Was there ever any kind of concern for a while growing up, or were you just living your life as a kid? Like, were you concerned that at one point your dad might have to make a judgment call that could affect the world?
I was not, because I always trusted my dad, and I knew he would do it without hesitation. So that never crossed my mind. And so and he always said, that's my job. He said, I will execute the order. I trust the president, and that's the decision that he would make. But I don't think he would have had any second thoughts. I just cannot imagine that.
Was he inspirational at some level? I'm assuming he probably was motivational, inspirational, or a catalyst into, embedding any kind of work ethic, intelligence, driving force. Because you're a very successful guy. You got your PhD, at least one. It sounds like you may have another one or more degrees. But was he a catalyst for some of that education and that growth?
I think he was. I mean, my dad was very busy when I grew up. He was, so although he was living with us and he was with us, but he was always gone, here and there. But I think what he brought to us, to me and my siblings, was a sense of ethics, a sense of duty, a sense of discipline, a sense of when you say something that you're going to do, you do it. And I'm very grateful that he brought those very core principles, in my life, and I use them every day. Um, yeah, so I think in that sense, he was very inspirational. He was tough. I mean, we had a tough education, but I think it was a just education. So it wasn't tough because of any kinds of issue. It was tough in a balanced way, and there were rules, and you had to respect them. Um, but I was a happy kid, and I didn't mind moving all the time. I thought that every kid was like that. To me, it was the way everybody would live. I could not imagine otherwise, because that was my life. But I probably was harder for some of my siblings. I don't think it's kind of weird. So, but you have to adapt and you have to learn. But in a way, the aspect I liked about this is I could kind of redefine me every 2 years. I could be a different guy, nobody would know. And so it gave me a chance to really figure out who I truly wanted to do. And I tried things, some of them worked, some of them didn't work, but I enjoyed that process. I thought that was kind of cool.
So the redefining, recalibrating yourself, and then also the ability to move to a new location and make new friendships and make a whole new kind of life for yourself really set you up for this move to Silicon Valley. And then also you get into this business, which you thought was kind of be, this you had one idea of it, and then you exit out of it. What was the next step from there once you exited out of the first company that you built?
Well, I actually sold it to Hachette, which is one of the largest companies in the world, publishing companies in the world, and they wanted to keep me. So it was in the early 90s. Hachette is at the time was a 160-year-old company.
Wow.
It was really an atom versus bits fight. In other words, they were printing books, they were paper, they were very old schools. And I remember going to David Pecker, who was the CEO of Hachette Phillippe magazine in New York. And I met with him for the first time, and I brought a CD-ROM, which is where you used to store, data at the time. I know maybe some of you audience don't, I've never seen one, but
I am very familiar with CDs. Yeah.
so I came to him, I put it on his desk and I said, David, this is going to impact your business. Now he was running a $2 billion business at the time. And he almost threw me out of his office. He said, we don't understand. We're printing magazines and books and we like paper, we like the touch, we like the smell. And I said, well, I know, but this is going to impact your business in any case. So I actually was hired to really steer the company towards this new area. And I run business development for electronic publishing for a few years. And we made some great deals. We did a big deal with Sony. We almost bought AOL. There were 71 people at the time. Steve Case was the CEO. We ended up buying them, much to my chagrin. We did a bunch of deals, and one of the deals I negotiated with Apple, and the guy at Apple liked me, and he said, well, why don't you come and work for us? And I did. Also, you have to understand, when I worked for Hachette, I had an office in Silicon Valley, I had an office in New York, in Midtown where they are, and then I had an office in Paris, which is where the headquarters is. And I was literally traveling all the time. And I wasn't married, didn't have any kids, but after 2 years, you grow pretty old pretty fast. And I was like, I'm tired of all this travel. So the Apple offer, was perfect. And then I joined Apple.
How long were you at Apple for?
About 3.5 years.
Any experience with Bill?
You mean with Steve?
Or is that not? Oh, I'm thinking Microsoft. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Steve. Yeah. So did you have any interaction with Steve before he passed?
Yeah, I had a lot of interaction. I actually worked for Steve for the last. So I spent about 3 years, and the last year I worked. Steve was kind of my boss. I mean, I had a boss, but effectively Steve was my boss. So I had a lot of interactions with him. Yes.
What was some of the learning lessons, teachings that you felt were very profound in terms of being in the same space as Steve Jobs?
Well, I think there are three big lessons I learned from Steve, and they have really served me well over the years, and I still use them today. The first one is, don't be focused. You want to be hyper-focused. I've actually never met such an intensely focused person in my life. So Steve was extremely focused. He was working on one thing at a time, but really driving it really, really hard. That's the first lesson I learned at Apple. The second one is that success comes from failing to make things complicated. So in other words, simplicity drives success. So simplicity is what Apple is all about. And it's really hard to execute. It's hard to simplify things. But when you can do that, then success will come. And then the third lesson I learned at Apple, which is really one of the core principles of aligning the dots, is the book I just wrote. And that I came to the realization that there is one and only one business on this entire planet. And let me repeat, just one business. And that business is the manufacturing and delivery of delight. If you manufacture and deliver delight, the delight that's expected, then that's the business we're all in. And once you start to understand that, then it puts things a little bit in perspective. And then it's a very universal alignment, the alignment between the expected delight and the delivery. And that applies to any business. And again, that was a core lesson I learned at Apple. And actually, interestingly enough, I didn't quite understand that until a few years after I left Apple. It took me a while to understand that notion. But that was a key lesson I learned from Steve.
I want to dive deep into the delivering delight, because I think that's so powerful for any business of any scope and size to be successful, is making your clients or your people, that your end users feel special, have some sort of expectation that you can deliver on time and time again. A process, there's a lot of process that goes into that, and a lot of probably quality, QA QC kind of thing.
Yeah.
So with going back to that one piece, for me, just personally, I want to figure out what was some of his tools when it came to being hyper focused. Did he ever preach about it? Did he ever talk about techniques, tools, arrows in the quiver that he would use was he just naturally hyper focused and honed in on it through the years? Or did he have some sort of guru, if you will, or some sort of process that really helped him buckle down and focus on one thing?
Yeah, I don't think he had a process. Maybe he did, but if he did, he certainly didn't share it. I think that Steve was a man of conviction. He was convinced of certain things, and once this conviction was set, he would just go for it. He wouldn't question it anymore. Now, I would say at the same time, he was convinced sometimes, but you could change his mind. So he wasn't a guy who was religious about things. He had an idea, he had a sense, he had a conviction, but he was open to being argued with, and you could, and it happened to me a few times where you could actually convince him to change his mind. Um, so I think of conviction and focus as two different things. At the same time, I was very focused. Once he had his direction and what he wanted to do, then he would be obsessive about it and making it happen. Um, and I think that's part of the reason he was such a successful business person.
Were you a part of the tribe personally, or the thought process of Silicon Valley, where you just you kind of work and burn the midnight oil and get up and you sleep maybe 4 hours a day? Are you part of that mindset? Were you part of that mindset, and where are you with that now in terms of just working till your eyes bleed?
Well, so Steve, when Steve came back, we bought Next in 1997, and when he came back, he was working extremely hard. I mean, Apple, people don't remember that, but Apple was in a very bad shape. I think in Q3 of 97, we lost $750 million, which was a huge number. We almost ran out of money. Microsoft and Prince Alwade actually bailed us. They each put $50 million into the company. Everybody thought the company would die. It was doomsday. The operating system was completely broken. We had 24 million products. It was just a mess. And Steve came back and he was working really hard. I mean, you would go to the campus at midnight, you would see him working. So he realized that there was no other way out of this mess than working really hard, hiring the right group of people around him, firing the group of people that he didn't think would carry the company. Now, do I think that you can be successful without working hard? I do not believe. I mean, you can be lucky, but I've worked with many CEOs. I've been a CEO myself. This is not the kind of things that you build a company without working hard. Now, do I believe that you should be putting, 110, 120 hours a week? No, because if you don't sleep enough, your brain cannot function.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a marathon, and there are times where you need to slow down, and there are times where you need to, work harder. But you cannot be in a mode where you always work really hard, and it's just, you burn out. And I've seen it happen, and it's terrible. And it's just not a way. I don't think you need this balance in life. You need to balance your family and people you love. You can't just work cannot be 100% of your focus.
No,
It just doesn't work.
at the end of the day, I've had the pleasure, and I'm very grateful for being around some people who had long lives, and some of the common themes are not dying with regret.
Yeah.
And it's nice to build things, and as CEOs, as creators, as leaders, as servant leaders, people that want to show up for other people. It's important to put the work in, but it's also as important to make sure that you're healthy, that if you're into spirituality, family, these other things that really what comes down to it are the most important things. You have to be filling those buckets as well. So
exactly right. Yeah.
In your experience, in your estimation, for the average, and it's not an average, but for a CEO or executive that's listening to this, where do you feel like the sweet spot is, even for you, in terms of obviously scaling forward, scaling back with hours a week, but what do you think is a good sweet spot range for people that are really trying to build something of significance?
I don't know. I mean, to me, what's important is that, sometimes people ask me, how many hours do you work a week? And to be frank, I have no idea. I just don't know. I work on weekends. I don't think I've spent any weekend without working. I was on vacation about 2 weeks ago, and I think I work about 4 hours a day. But to me, the most important is two things. One is, being efficient. So where do you spend your time, and is this time well spent? Because time, as opposed to money, is once the hour is gone, the hour is gone. You're not going to get it back.
Right.
And then the second thing is, do you really enjoy and love what you're doing? Because when that happens, then time doesn't matter. You just do it. And it's not a burden. I don't think of work as a burden. I think of work as one of the things that I enjoy doing. And if I don't enjoy doing it, then I change work and I do something else. And, I'm privileged and lucky enough to be able to do that. I realize that. But I'm very conscious about, having enjoying and, getting something more than just, money or whatever it is that people are looking for.
Sure. So for someone who's listening or watching this, when this episode comes out, and they're finding lack of joy in their vocation or in their calling or something that they've built, so I think we go through seasons, especially entrepreneurs, A lot of entrepreneurs have that shiny new object syndrome, where they see something, they're excited, they go chase it. Either staying the course, which, discipline equals freedom in a lot of ways there. But what would you say to somebody who needs to reframe their lens on maybe falling back in love with what they were doing? Or what would you say to someone who needs that kind of insight, where they're doing something they've built, but they maybe lost the luster for it and they're kind of looking to get it back? They don't want to give up on what they've built.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. To me, the first question I would ask them is, why are you not happy anymore? What has changed? And because there's many reasons you could be unhappy. So for example, you could be unhappy because you get acquired by a company and you don't like the team and you don't enjoy working with them. You could be unhappy because you realize that the goal that you had is not going to happen. You're not going to reach that goal. You could be unhappy because suddenly a competitor is just, ate your lunch and you're not going anywhere. Now, is this a temporary unhappiness because, it's a roller coaster, it's ups and downs? Or is this something like a depression where you have it and it accumulates? And so you need to be really thoughtful about what kind of unhappiness do you experience and why. Once you understand the why, then it's a little bit easier to fix. Now, if you're unhappy because you have a disease, there's not a lot we can do. I mean, it is tragic and you have to take care of yourself as best as you can. But if you're unhappy because you're working with the team that you don't like, I would say change the team, find somebody else. You know, I I think that the quest for happiness has always to be there, and unhappiness over a long period of time is just unhealthy.
Yep.
And again, there's people that are unhappy because they lost a dear one. I mean, there are unhappiness in life that you don't control, and there's not much you can do about it. Um, but there is unhappiness that people have, and they're just not willing to change. And in that case, if they can change, they shouldn't have the right to complain. I mean, they should do something about it.
Would you recommend anything in terms of like aligning with mentors or other successful people, or are there tools that you've found and maybe in your own personal journey where maybe you were looking to get back to that place of fulfillment and happiness, some tools that you may have used, like daily practical tools to kind of realign your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think being grateful, I mean, being grateful for what we have. I always tell my kids, and they always remind me because they hate when I say that, because I said it millions of times to them. I
Yeah.
said, you shouldn't be unhappy with what you don't have. You should be happy with what you have. And I think after 20 or 22 years, that they are now, I think it starts to sink. Um, I think that there is many reasons to be unhappy about things, but there is even more reasons, I think, to be happy in our lives, the privileged life that we live. And I think we should be grateful and recognize that. So I think bringing perspective to one's life, I think, is really important. And just remind ourselves that, hey, yeah, we're unhappy because of that, but it's really, in the grand scheme of things, it's really nothing compared to the millions of people who are truly suffering.
For sure.
Um, in terms of mentors, I don't really like the word mentors because it tends to establish a hierarchy of, they know more than I do, or they've done bigger things that I have. I really prefer the term advisor. And,
Love that.
it's finding people who have the honesty to tell you what they think, who you have a very deep trust relationship with them. They trust you and you trust them, and who are non-judgmental. I always tell CEO, I said, look, I would not do what you're on the verge of doing, and here is why. But I'm telling you this as a CEO who's made that mistake, but I will not fight against you doing it. If you decide to do it, that's perfectly fine. My job is to tell you why I would do something different and also respect your decision. And it's like when you raise kids, you have to let them fail sometimes, even though it's heartbroken and it's hard.
Very hard to
But
do.
that's the only way for them to learn. And so I think it's hard. It's people who can speak the truth and can, you know, have this trust relationship. And if you can find people that bring those things, I think they are invaluable. I think they are really important.
Some of the happiest, most successful people I know in all areas of life, relationships, business, health and wellness, they seem to have a daily gratitude practice. They seem to have
Mhm.
something that they're grateful for, something that helps keep them on the path. And, I've personally gone through times in my life where I had to whittle down, and I felt, very unhappy, whether it was business or relationships. And I had to stack gratitude. And it was, I woke up today, I'm healthy today, I have this today, like little by little. And you start doing this, and you start stepping into the feeling of it. Maybe you do a meditation, you get that profound joy, and you start eking out, wins in your life. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's putting things in perspective. It's like, okay, what's happening to me, does it really matter? What's the implication of that 10 years from now? And then you realize how small those things really are.
So I think a great paradox to unhappiness is delight. Like we,
Yeah.
we couldn't even have segued that better. So as far as, delivering delight, and even the mindset behind that, where did you start feeling as a business operator, CEO, or creator? Where did that mindset of delivering delight even come from? And tell me how you operate with that today.
Yeah, I think that I learned that from Apple and from Steve. I mean, Steve was obsessed about the customer experience. So if you buy an iPhone today and you open the box, the act of opening the box has been very well crafted and engineered. There's a little thing you can grab. It's easy. You know what to do. Once you took the top out, you know what the next step is. That is very, very carefully engineered. And it's part of the delightfulness experience. Um, Steve was obsessed about noise, so he couldn't stand the noise of a floppy disk. For those even older who remember, or even a CD-ROM.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, the Next Cube, his first machine as Next, didn't have a floppy disk driver, which drove developers crazy. Um, he was obsessed about the noise of a fan, and it's a very tricky problem. Imagine you have a laptop, you may have 2 or 3 fans in there that are spinning at different speed, and you're trying to have a Zoom call, and you have a mic, you have 2 or 3 microphones built into the hardware, very close to the fan. It's like, how do you not hear the sound of the fans? So he was very sensitive to details that many people didn't think it was important, and I realized that they are actually really important. So, for example, the smell of an Apple product when you open a box is actually important. And that's not by accident. The same way the smell of a new car is really important.
Or sneakers. When I was a kid, I used to love the
Yeah,
smell of a brand new pair of sneakers. I didn't get a lot of brand new pair of sneakers growing up, but then when I started getting them, I was like, these are the best smelling things in
yeah,
the world.
yeah. So I think, to answer your question, I became more and more, because I asked myself, well, why is this so important? I mean, Steve is a smart guy. Why does these things, those little details that nobody cares about, are important? And I realized that it's the accumulation of those details that really are part of the delightfulness experience of people interacting with your product or your service. And that's how I became so sensitive to that question. Now, the other thing I want to say, because I think this is an important point, is that delight doesn't exist in itself. It only exists once the expectation of delight has been set, right? So if I go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant, my expectation of the experience is very different from if I go to a McDonald's where I'm going to pay 99 cents for a burger. Now, it doesn't mean that there is no market for McDonald's or people are not happy or delighted, but my delight expectation in both cases is very, very different. As I consume the product or as I experience the service, then the question is, well, was my expectation met? Was there an impedance mismatch between what I had expected and the delight that was delivered to me? If the answer is no, then the business is successful and is doing the right thing. If the answer is yes, then, well, maybe you can change the product so that it brings more delight, or you can actually change the expectation, which, by the way, is a lot cheaper and more effective. And I advise a lot of companies to change the expectation. And so it's really, what expectation am I setting as a business to my customers or my prospects? And then once they consume my product, is their delight expectation met? And if not, then I have a problem which I need to address. But delight in itself is always in the context of an expectation. And when you buy an Apple product, you're expected to be delighted
For
because that's
sure.
the culture.
For sure. There's a reason why they are where they
I
are.
wouldn't say I wouldn't say the same thing on Microsoft, but that's my Apple hat.
I was actually hoping to get into a Microsoft conversation, and with the thoughts on Bill Gates, and kind of some of the there's a lot of concern right now in the world about kind of where he's trying to take things, and I don't know where your thoughts are, beliefs are around this, but there's a lot of discussion around him, looking to take over and do different things, and just from a global
Yeah,
scale.
I met Bill twice in my life. I was surprised how smart he is. He is a ferocious reader. He's a
Good.
learner. He learns and he goes very deep in all kinds of topics. Um, his foundation, I think, is really trying to make the world a better place. I mean, he's spending his own money, billions of dollars, helping, countries that need help and people. I have to confess, I do not understand why some people think that Bill Gates has malicious intentions or is trying to do things, I just don't understand. I have never witnessed or I never sensed that Bill wanted to do anything like this. Quite on the contrary. This notion that he may put a chip on a vaccine makes no sense. It makes no scientific sense. It makes no sense at all. I just don't get it. I just don't understand.
You don't believe the conspiracy theories, so to speak, that paint him as like an antichrist type character.
No, I don't believe that for 1 second. No. And if you read his book and if you get to know him and if you look at his foundation, like how can you drive that conclusion? I just don't understand.
Yeah. Well, some people, they're just they have their thoughts, but it was good to kind of get your perspective on it. So, you're in a business. Let's talk about a service provider, like even myself specifically, where I interface with my clients pretty heavily at this stage in my career. I'm a wealth manager. I manage their financial planning decisions. I manage their investments and all these things. And I really manage behaviors. I manage habits.
Right.
And so I am on I guess I would say in a way, the ground level a lot, where I'm dealing day-to-day interactions with clients. How does someone let's say there's a lot of service-based businesses that are out there. There's a lot of businesses that are run by the owner or the entrepreneur, where they're interfacing with their clients. How would you advise someone like myself, where I'm looking to deliver that delightful experience time and time again?
Yeah, I would. So I would.
Comes to mind. I just want to get your thoughts on, if you're a wealth manager, if you're a real estate advisor, if you're someone who's a coach or an advisor by trade, how would you advise that CEO, business owner, person to interact within their day-to-day to deliver a consistent, delightful experience to the end user?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't make a difference between a tangible product, and a service. Right. I mean, if I buy an airplane ticket to fly to Paris, it's not a product. I mean, it's a service.
Sure.
If I buy a car, it's a product. But to me, it doesn't make, it in terms of delightfulness experience, it doesn't change anything. It's the same thing. The second thing is I would step back a little bit and say, okay, there are 4 principles of alignment between any business and its target market. So to answer your question, I would look at your own business, along those 4 lenses and ask myself, am I well aligned? And let me go through what those 4 elements are. So the first one is that the pain of the customer and the claim that you're making as a business have to be aligned. So you have to understand their pain and you have to make a claim that's addressing their pain. The second alignment is that the message, which is the expression of the claim, and the perception, which is their understanding of your claim, those 2 things have to be aligned. Right? Whatever you tell them you're going to do for them, they have to understand what it is. The third one is the purchase and the sale have to be aligned. So the way they want to purchase your service and the way you sell your service has to be aligned. So it's like a frictionless transaction, if you will. And then the 4th axis, which is the one we talked about, which is that the expected delight and the experience and what's delivered actually have to be aligned. And I would claim that if you perfectly align your business along those 4 axes, so the claim and the pain, the message and the perception, the purchase and the sale, and the delight and the delivery, then your business will grow as much as possible within your target market. You will reach the maximum possible success within your business. So again, I would look at your own business and said, okay, well, what's my claim and what's the pain? Are those guys aligned? And then go through those 4 axes of alignment and rectify any misalignment that you may perceive to have, you may have.
And I'm assuming, based on the company Blue Dots Partners and the book that you've curated and delivered to the world, there's a lot of this conversation in that vernacular.
Yeah, so the book is really focused on what do I do on Monday morning at 8 o'clock to grow my business. And the answer to that deceptively simple question is that you have to align your business along those four independent axes of alignment. And what's quite remarkable, I would say, about those four axes is that they apply to any business. So I can take a cafe on the left bank of Paris. I can take your, financial advising business. I can take Tesla. I can take Boeing. It doesn't matter. The four principles of alignments are exactly the same. Um, and then the book actually goes one step further, which is, can I measure the coefficient of alignment along each of those four axes? And we actually develop some tools, which some of them are published in the book, that enable businesses to measure from 0 to 100% how well they are aligned along each of those four axes. And then the next step is, once I have this insight, once I understand where I'm misaligned and by how much, then I can start to put together a growth playbook, which is a list of actions that need to be taken so that you can start to grow faster. And that playbook is really the answer to the question about what do I do on Monday morning at 8 o'clock to start growing my business faster. And that's what the book is all about.
Let's dive into it a little bit, because I know this is a great effort. I'm in the middle. I'm not the middle. I'm a third of the way completed with writing my first book, and it's no easy task. It's easier for some than others. It's depending on time and what you dedicate to it and the process and all these things. So for you, where did you start coming up? Is this your first book? And then where did you start coming up with the idea, and talk about the actual process of getting it to market?
Yeah, it's actually my second book, but nobody has ever heard or read my first book, which was about physics a long time ago. And it was a very esoteric book, so in many ways. But anyway, so not counting that book, is my first book. Writing the book was actually easy for me because a lot of those data, a lot of those tools and methodology we've been building over the years. So I didn't have to wake up and say, okay, what am I going to talk about this morning? Um, I talked about discipline earlier in this conversation. The way I did it is, it was the first thing I would do in the morning. So I would start writing, at 6 or 7 a.m. for 30 minutes every day, and then 1 hour on Sundays or Saturdays or weekends. And it took me about 10 months, 11 months to write the book. What I didn't realize is that writing the book, and and I'd be happy to have that conversation a year from now, that what I did not realize, that writing the book is actually the easy part. The tough part is the marketing, the distribution, the advertisement of the book. I had a great team of people that helped me with the design, because I was really obsessed about the design. I wanted this book to be a really well-designed book. It's actually a full color book, which is very rare in business. It's high quality paper. The smell is there. I don't know if you notice it or not, but so all that I cared about, because that's my Apple background. I wanted to have a good product, not only about the content, but just the physical aspect of it. So I had editors. I had a great designer I worked with on the cover and on the inside. There's about 70 charts and graphics and pictures in the book. Um, but then again, it's okay. Well, now you write a book, it's on Amazon, but then who's going to care about the book? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to read it? And that's really the hard work of marketing and pushing the book. And I think that, to me, was more work than actually writing the book. But everybody's different, so that's just my personal experience.
Was the experience enlightening in a sense of how much effort there still went into actually getting the book into the hands of the reader? I mean, and what has that process been like for you? What are some of the things you've learned that were things you would never do again, or maybe double down on again if you were to do your third book?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit particular because the book came out last year, a few months ago, right in the middle of the pandemic, which obviously I didn't anticipate. So I had a big launch event that was scheduled for May of last year. It was like 150 people, would have been video recorded. And then, 3 weeks before the event was canceled. I was supposed to give a TEDx talk last year as well. It was canceled in August of last year. So there was a lot of marketing programs that I put in place that really didn't work out because of the pandemic. So that really threw a wrench in the whole thing. I think that if you write a book, there's a fundamental question that you need to answer upfront, which is, why am I writing this book? And if the answer is because I want to make money as an author, that's a very, very difficult path. And it wasn't my motivation. I didn't care much whether I would sell 100 or 10,000, or, that wasn't my goal. I wrote the book for educational purposes. I wanted people to know about this new way of thinking. And I wanted people to discover this new methodology, because I do think it's profound and it's impactful. So that was to me the best way to educate whoever was interested in this topic. Um, Now, of course, there is some marketing dividends for Blue Dots and credibility, and that's not negligible. That's important. But I think answering the question, why am I writing this book, and the answer cannot be A, B, and C. It has to be one of them. And once you answer that question, then the marketing strategy then comes in place, because you're like, okay, well, if you wrote a book for authority marketing, then LinkedIn is a much better place to promote the book than Facebook, for example.
Sure.
So depending on the book and depending on what you're trying to achieve, then the marketing strategy is going to be very different. The other thing is there was I don't know if you've crossed that mark or not, but there's the debate on, are you self-publishing or do you want to find a publisher?
What I was thinking
And
a few seconds ago. Yeah.
yeah, so I talked to Guy Kawasaki, who I think wrote 15 or 20 books. And Guy told me, an ex-Apple guy, they were a great guy, and he told me, he said, you'd be crazy not to self-publish. And then I talked to other people who wrote, books, like Jeffrey Moore, who wrote Crossing the Chasm, and he said, well, because you have to have a publisher, otherwise nobody's going to care. The problem with the publisher is that it takes 18 months to get your book out.
Yes.
So it takes a long time. Then the economics is not very attractive. They take a big piece of the revenue.
They have the control after that too.
And then they have the control. So if you want to do a TV series, for example, they have a saying, they have some rights that you don't have. They also have editing rights and editing and design rights. They can change your cover, and you don't have anything to say. And so I looked at all that and I said, I want my book to be out in like 6 to 9 months. I cannot wait 18 months. So just that timing issue was a non-starter for me. And then there is really no advantage, because the real way to think about the publishing world today is like Kinko's. They are able to put a book in physical shelf space that you don't have access to, or it's not easy. But now, most of the sales are done on Amazon anyway. There is no physical location,
right?
Plus the pandemic. But even without the pandemic, so the value add that they bring is very limited. You can find really good editors, which I would encourage you to do. I mean, somebody has to read your manuscript and correct all the mistakes and all that. But if you think about the true value add that they bring, it's really not that much. And then the economics is in their favor, not yours. So I decided to self-publish, and that was, I would encourage anybody to write a book to self-publish. Now, if your book becomes a massive success and you sell 100,000 copies, then you'll be approached by an editor who said, well, you're going to do a second book, and then you can work with them maybe.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't think there is any good reason to go with
Beautiful advice. And I actually was at a speakeasy event led by Steve Sims. Amazing fun guy. He had a guy named Tucker Max at his event. Tucker Max, if you're familiar with this name. Yeah, he was talking about, even though he's in the business of publishing, helping people get their books from idea to someone's hands, he was talking about the pros and cons of each, and he was talking about best practices and things like this. And so it really left me with the same idea that you're speaking about now, about going self-publishing, and that's the direction I'll go with my first book, no question.
Yeah. I find a good editor, and in fact several editors, and then find a good designer. I think this is really important.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah. The book cover, all these things. And as far as just kind of buttoning up the alignments, the 4 alignments that you have, really kind of is one of your, great deliverables to the world. How has it played into your life in terms of seeing them come to fruition and operating with them personally? And then have you seen other businesses that have adopted the 4 alignments, and what has it done for their growth or their reach?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that the fair question you're asking is that, does it really work? And I think that's kind of what I sense in your question. And the answer is yes. So here's what we did. We've worked with many companies deploying and implementing our methodology. And I think we've done about 70 or 80 engagements so far. But I think what we did is we measured the growth rate of the company before they hired us. So let's say the company was growing at 10% a year. And then we work with them, we deliver them the growth playbook, And then we measured the growth rate 12 months after implementing the growth playbook, after the start of the implementation of the growth playbook. And some of our clients actually don't implement our growth playbook. So it's like you go to the doctor, they give you the prescription, and you said, well, I'm not going to get the pills. I don't want to follow the treatment. And that's okay. So we didn't take that into our calculation because we cannot figure out whether we have them or not because they didn't follow our advice. And what we realized is that we had an uplift of 39% in terms of their growth rate. So again, 12 months before the growth they had, the 12 months before they hired us, and then 12 months after they implemented the growth playbook, typically their growth rate on average would grow up by 39%, so significant uplift. And I actually didn't believe the number at the beginning. I was like, no, we made a mistake. This is wrong. So we ran the calculation several times, but it is correct. And what happens is the reason it works so well is not because we're smart. It's not because we know things they don't know. It's because, we're bringing common sense back to the CEO and the management team. And there is a huge sense of losing your common sense when you run a company. And I've felt it myself for many, many times. When I left Apple, I realized that 95% of the computers were PCs running Windows. And I kind of knew that somewhere in my brain, but I didn't really pay attention. But I was shocked. I mean, I was shocked that people would not use a Mac. It's like, how can you not use a Mac? And so, that's an example where I lost my common sense. And, my wife has a business where she helps families with their baby to make their baby sleep better. So she works with baby between 6 months and maybe 18, 24 months. And I was discussing with her the other day, and I said, you and I are in the same business. We're bringing common sense back to me, the CEO, and you, the parents. And the parents lose their common sense with their babies, especially if it's the first one. And then you add the fact that they are not sleeping well at night, so they're deprived, sleep deprived, and then their common sense, is lost even more because of that.
Yep.
And so, by bringing common sense back to the CEOs, by measuring this alignment, bringing data and not emotions and real facts, really makes the company grow faster. That's, I think, what we're good at. It's not, again, because we're smart and we know better. It's just because we measure and we're very disciplined in our approach.
Just a side note, it wasn't your wife's company, but the value of what your wife does is immeasurable. And anyone that
I know.
has a child that isn't sleeping, please reach out to Phillippe and his wife.
Our website is thesleepinginfant.com. And you can just read the testimonials. I mean, it's people I study.
I will. So just in terms of how valuable this service is, I won't name the other company's name for competition purposes, but they came in, we had a child that we used it for both kids and right around 6 weeks for the first one. And within 3 days, our oldest son now, Grayson, sleeps 10 to 12 hours a night from that 3-day engagement. So I'm assuming your wife does something very similar. And
she's a pediatrician nurse by training, and she studied sleeping patterns of babies, which is almost the opposite of adults. Very, very different. So she has a very well established methodology. And again, she always said this. She said, look, babies by design sleep well. The reason they don't sleep well is because parents, screw up. They do the opposite things of what they should be doing. And of course, they don't know it. And so she's like, if babies had problems sleeping, as a species, we would be extinguished. We wouldn't be human beings anymore. So it's really trying to open the eyes of the parents and said, look, I know you're doing it this way for that reason, but babies sleep differently. Their sleep patterns is different. And for example, a baby that's young does not make the difference between days and nights. Well, parents have no notion about this. So she understands the sleeping and the medical and the science behind it, and then she applies it back to the parents.
So powerful.
But it's a very, very similar job to what we do. We do pretty much the same thing for CEOs. We bring common sense back to them, and that's how we can help them.
Well, it sounds like you're a power couple. And I would say to anyone listening or watching, reach out to Phillippe to get into alignment for business, and then reach out to his wife to get some sleep. But thank you so much, Phillippe.
So you can, if you want to sleep better, you can talk to my wife or you can read my book.
That's it. Thanks so much, brother, for everything that you've brought to the table today. Is there anything that you're working on or you want to talk about before we jump off?
No, I'm working on my TEDx talk, which is really an interesting exercise. Condensing the book in 18 minutes is a really interesting exercise, very hard, much harder than I thought. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with great management teams and great CEOs, helping them grow, making a difference in their business. And Jesse, I have to say, it was a real pleasure to be on your show. I want to thank you so much. And I really, I'm a big fan of what you're doing, helping people and the way you think and the way you can make a difference. And I think that's great.
Thank you so much for that love, brother, and back at you tenfold. I'm looking forward to where our journey leads us. And then for those that may be checking out your future content, are you going to be doing a TEDx virtual, in person?
Well, so it's a bit tricky. I was supposed to do a TEDx on August 14th of this year, to the one that was canceled last year. And then about 2 weeks ago, the organizer reached out to me and she said, well, we're going to have a very small audience. And it's out of state, so I have to fly there. And she said, so you can't do it, you can't go there, but you can do it, you can record it and send it to us. And I told her, I said, I really want the experience of talking to an audience. I don't want to record, I'm not interested in this. So it sounds like I'm going to do the TEDx talk a year from August, so it'd be August 2022. So the good news is I'm ready. The whole thing is, it's scripted and I've learned it. The bad news, it's not the bad news. I'm just going to have to be a bit more patient. So I want to do it the right way. I want to do it with an audience. And I'm really looking forward to that.
You have our full support here at the podcast. We'll do whatever we can to get your name out there as much as possible. And looking forward to the next conversation, brother. Thank you so much. He's the amazing, the mighty, the powerful Phillippe Bouissou. I'm Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T Show.